So the fellas all decided to go hunting. And so the big group of them went and they camped in the camp, and they were going out 2 by 2 during the day to hunt for the deer. And at the end of the day, in walked one of the campers back with a big buck on his back, panting and gasping. And he walked into the camp and they said, "Where's Harry?" And he said, "Harry passed out 1.5 miles up the trail." And they said, "And you carried the buck in and left Harry there?" And he said, "Well, it was a hard decision, but I didn't figure anybody would steal Harry." Love is a relationship, and a relationship is about loyalty, isn't it? Loyalty, no matter what. The fella got married, and soon after he was married, he was afraid that his wife had married him just for money. They call them gold diggers, right? And so he was concerned about it, and so he came to her and he just put it all out on the table. He said, "I'm afraid that you only love my money. If I were poor, would you still love me?" And she said, "Of course I'd love you." She said, "I miss you terribly, but I'd love you just the same." We aren't very loyal lovers, we humans, in a sinful world. Love has been polluted and maligned. We've taken it and twisted it, and we've called all sorts of things love that are not love. And we've filled our world with a conception of love that is a lie. We think that love is a thing, and love is a relationship. Love is action. And in the world that is not right, we have relationships that are also not right. Interestingly, love is supposed to bring us comfort. Friendship and love is comfort. In fact, the Bible says so in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 3. 2 Corinthians 1:3. I'm told that I don't give you enough time to look them up. So let me give you a minute. 2 Corinthians 1:3 says, "All praise to God, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. God is our merciful Father and the source of all comfort. He comforts us in all of our troubles so that we can comfort others. When they are troubled, we will be able to give them the same comfort God has given us." Love is supposed to bring comfort, isn't it? God has decided that one of the most important tasks of love is to bring comfort. For verse 5, "For the more we suffer for Christ, the more God will shower us with comfort through Christ." Do you think that's true? The more we suffer, the more we have comfort. Even when we are weighed down with troubles, it is for comfort and salvation. For when we ourselves are comforted, we will certainly comfort you. Then you can patiently endure the same things we suffer. We are confident that as you share in our sufferings, you will also share in the comfort that God gives us. You know, love is designed for comfort, but also love on this earth has its troubles. And many of the troubles that we have in our relationships of love are based on our problems that we have with control. Have you ever met a controller? They cannot let anything escape what is under their control. Perhaps you've worked for this person. Perhaps you're married to this person. Perhaps you've been married to this person in the past. I don't know. The point is that we have people in our lives that control, and sometimes we're controllers. And there's two kinds of controllers. You know, the one kind of controller is the one that says, "This is the way it will be no other way, and this is the way it's going to be forever." And there's the other kind who usually lives with that kind who says, "We'll see." And the "we'll see" person figures a way more quietly, more sneakily, more manipulatively to accomplish the same control end. Why do we have such an obsession with control? Because uncertainty makes us uncomfortable. We're hardwired to want control. We're hardwired for things to be as we expect them to be, for things to be right, for things to be comfortable. And yet, the very control that we attempt to exercise often defeats that. And what's interesting is, if you study into the concept and the ideas of control, we don't need to control to be in comfort. What we need is for regular expectations to be met. And there are two ways to accomplish that. One is by absolute control. It's hard to do, but if you can do it. And the other is by trusting in one who is in control. See, we always default that we're going to need to control the situation. But if we recognize that there is one who is in control of the situation, then we no longer need to control it ourselves. I would love to control everything. There's a text here that we want to go to in Luke chapter 22, verse 28, while you're looking it up. Luke 22, 28. Here's Jesus talking to Peter. Very near the end, Jesus is talking to Peter. Luke 22, 28, it says, "You have stayed with me in my time of trial, and just as my Father has granted me a kingdom, I now grant you the right to eat and drink at my table in my kingdom. And you will sit on thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel." And then he goes into a special little soliloquy with Simon. He says, "Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift each of you like wheat." Now that's a colloquialism in Greek. Sift each of you like wheat means pick each of you apart. Pick apart is what that means. So Satan has asked Peter to pick you apart, he says. Satan has asked to pick you apart. "But I have pleaded in prayer for you, Simon, that your faith should not fail. So when you have repented and turned to me again, strengthen your brothers." Isn't that interesting? If I was Jesus in the flesh, I wouldn't have let him get away. I would have said, "Peter, Satan has asked to pick you apart. Therefore, I'm going to bind your hands and feet with rope, and I'm going to put this bag over your head, and I don't want you coming out of this room for 48 hours. That way, you won't ever betray me." That would be an easy way to solve the problem, wouldn't it? Jesus knew what was going to happen because he went on to say so. He said, Peter said, "Lord, I am ready to go to prison with you, to even die for you." But Jesus said, "Peter, let me tell you something. Before the rooster crows tomorrow morning, you will deny 3 times that you even know me." So he knew the future. If I knew that future, couldn't I control it better? I'd tell him, "Peter, you need to walk to Galilee. Forget about Jerusalem. Go to Galilee. Don't think about this. Don't come back for a week." And then Peter wouldn't have betrayed me. I could have controlled that situation. How about you? But Jesus didn't control the situation, even though he was the one guy on the planet that could control the situation. It's interesting to me, the essence of the great controversy. The essence of the great controversy is that God took a part of what was rightfully his utter and unfettered choice to rule the universe, and he carved out a little part of that, and he gave it away to me, never to take it back. Even when it would be wise of him to take it back, he ceded that part. You know, that's the problem that the predestinationists don't understand. They say God can do everything, and therefore he knows everything, and therefore he controls everything. And I say no, because he specifically carved out a part of that which he would not control, my free will. And he will only control me to the extent that I submit myself to his control. Have you ever met somebody that just won't submit themselves to his control? You've worked for that person too, haven't you? That's called evil, isn't it? And I've been that person, haven't you? And he says, this I will not control. I will not control the free choice that James has today as to what to say. Unless he asks me. Unless he invites me. And so, trouble comes when we have relationships and we let other people free to make choices. When I was dating Mary Ellen, we dated for 4 years. And if you dated anybody for 4 years, you know you had a breakup or two, right? So we broke up, and if I got this card once, I got it 4 times. It said, "If you love something, You got it too, didn't you? Yeah. If you love something, let it go free. If it does not return, chase it down and stomp it. No, that was a different one. If it does not return, it was never meant to be. If it does return, handcuff it and never let it, no. If it does return, love it forever, right? That was horrible. No kid who has broken up with his true love ever wants to hear that. What we really want is to control the beloved, right? What we really want is to put him in a straitjacket and say, that one's mine. We want to lock him in a room and say, you can't break up with me. This is my world and you're part of it. If anybody here has gone through a divorce, you know that there is no good end in controlling. The question is, can we give up this control that we so are attached to? Is it possible to give it up? Is it possible to examine one's behavior and realize the controlling behaviors that we have? How many times do we use our words and our deeds to try to control other people? How do we eliminate that control from our experience? We have to look to our leader. Jesus said, Peter, Satan is going to pick you apart. I have prayed for you, I have prayed for you and he's going to not be successful. He said, I have prayed for you that after you have repented from him picking you apart, that you will return and help your brethren. He doesn't say, I fixed it, you won't be picked apart. Is it possible? Is it possible that part of God's plan for me is being picked apart from time to time? Are my mistakes perhaps part of God's character building plan for my life? Could it be that I can even thank God when I realize my sin? And I realize where I have fled from God. You know, the Bible says love is patient, love is kind. Love is not jealous. Love is not boastful, nor proud, nor rude. I mean, that really limits things, doesn't it? I mean, that kind of puts me in a straitjacket, doesn't it? Love is not rude. Well, I don't know how else to behave. It does not demand its own way. It is not irritable. It keeps no record of being wronged. And what fun is that, really? Keeping records of being wrong is the best way to control people, isn't it? Hey, you remember when? 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. I don't know. I knew a lady once. She had a divorce. Every time anybody met anybody new, within, the first 15 minutes of conversing with her, the divorce that was still raw on her heart would come up. How long ago was the divorce, I asked her. 20 years. And it's still that fresh. Oh, man, he broke my heart. I said, it should have healed by now. This is a good time for healing. Let's not think about that anymore. Let's talk about where your life is going from now. And we don't have to revisit that one today. She was still trying to control him after 20 years of separation. He was married, had a new family. She was still trying to control him after all those years. Love does not rejoice about injustice, but rejoices when truth wins out. Love never gives up. It never loses faith. And it is always hopeful and endures every circumstance. Now, I told you we have a problem in our culture of calling things love that are not love. There are sick, codependent relationships in which people allow themselves to be beaten, abused, and betrayed on a daily basis. That is not love. Love has what we call boundaries, doesn't it? And if you need to know more about that, talk to Judy because she's an expert in boundaries. Judy is a certified counselor of the boundary system by the Townsend fella. And she can teach you about that. But love has boundaries. Love doesn't continue to do that, but love also is willing to be hurt because love sometimes brings pain, doesn't it? It's designed to bring pleasure, and it brings us all lots of pleasure. but it also sometimes brings pain. Here it says in John chapter 18:15, Simon Peter followed Jesus, as did another of the disciples. That other disciple was acquainted with the high priest, so he was allowed to enter the high priest's courtyard with Jesus. Peter had to stay outside the gate. Then the disciple who knew the high priest spoke to the woman watching at the gate, and she let Peter in. The woman asked Peter, "You're not one of this man's disciples, are you?" "No," he said, "I am not." And I'll share with you that story of old. I think I may have shared it before. Once I had a Sabbath school teacher who was a hippie. He was a nice hippie, had a big beard, not as big as some people in this church, but he had a nice big beard. He had a nice big beard, and he wanted us to have some alone time with God. So on Sabbath afternoon, he took us out to the wilderness. And he took us to the wilderness, and he said, "I want you to walk out into the wilderness and get far enough away so that you can't see or hear anybody else. And I want you to just focus on a text, and I want you to listen for God's voice." He's a pretty good teacher, really. So we went out to the wilderness, we sat, and we listened. And as I was in the wilderness, I found a large metal steel pike. It weighed 25, 30 pounds. It was huge, 6 feet long, that big around. And I thought, let's see what this will do. And I started hammering the rocks with it. Breaking rocks. Wham, 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 wham. I'm sure the other people were getting a lot out of their little time with God as I was pounding on the rocks with this pike. I was young. I didn't know any better. But I'm pounding on the rocks. Oh, I probably did know better. Anyway, so the teacher finally walked up to me and he said, "Is that you making all that racket?" And here I stand with this large iron pipe in my hand. And I said, "No." He said, "Well, what's that in your hand?" And I said, "It's a steel pipe." And he said, "Well, then stop it." I said, "Okay." Peter said, "No, I'm not one of his disciples. He's only lived with him for 3.5 years. No, I'm not one of his disciples." Meanwhile, as he was standing by the fire warming himself, they asked him again, "Are you not one of his disciples?" And he said, "No, I'm not." But one of the household slaves of the high priest, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, asked, "Didn't I see you out there in the olive grove with Jesus?" And again Peter denied it, and immediately a rooster crowed. Now, in every movie they make of that scene, there's always an open door into the trial room, right? And just then, Peter looks over and Jesus catches his eye and he looks at him. How does an actor not have "I told you so" all over your face when you do that part, right? But I want to suspect that he was in the courtyard. And perhaps, think with me for perhaps, it made a dramatic moment in the movie, but perhaps he had to deal with his betrayal and the rooster all by himself. Perhaps Peter heard the rooster and he recognized that Jesus was going to be crucified. He had betrayed him and he was good and truly alone. And he didn't have the reassurance of Jesus' eyes looking at him. Friendship, love on this broken planet can often result in great pain. It was designed for comfort, but it can often result in great pain. But did you know that the reason that you and I are placed here in ministry, exactly what Jamal was talking about, the reason that we're here is to bring comfort to those in pain. The only reason that we're here is to bring comfort to those in pain. There's an interesting statistic I found in my research. Since 1950, we have multiplied 100 times the professional caregivers in our society. In this society, we have in the United States, we have 77,000 clinical psychologists, 192,000 clinical social workers. That means social workers working in a clinical environment, 105,000 mental health counselors, 50,000 marriage and family therapists, 17,000 nurse psychotherapists, 30,000 life coaches, and hundreds of thousands of non-clinical social workers and substance abuse counselors, all of them spending the majority of their time dealing with regular, everyday, daily problems that people have. That is an indictment of God's church. We have ceded to the professionals what we ourselves should be doing. We should be loving people through the everyday bumps and bruises of this sinful world. We should be holding the hands of people who are hurting. We should be hugging and embracing the people who mourn. We should be rejoicing with people who rejoice. We should be visiting with the lonely. We should be feeding the hungry and clothing the naked. That is what we're called to do, and that is what love is about, and that is the love that will change the world and that will evangelize this hard country we live in. Amen. We live in a post-Christian society, and the only thing that will change the tide is the love that God prescribes that will comfort those who are hurting. There are people all around you who are hurting. Mary Ellen has a little fetish that she doesn't like to talk about. She, when she can't sleep, she turns on the foreign shows on Netflix so that she can read the subtitles and she can watch in the dark and not have anybody else be awakened, right? So she was watching one the other day, and I watched it with her. Okay, I was watching it. And it was a police drama. It was really interesting. It was a police drama, and the policeman's friend, the other policeman, had been killed, and he was investigating the other policeman. Now, just before the policeman had been killed, he had tried to tell his friend that something was going on badly in his life, but his friend hadn't been listening. He was busy and preoccupied. And so after he died, he was investigating the other policeman's death. And he's going around talking to everybody who knew him, and everybody who knew him had the same response. Well, you should know. He told me you were his best friend. The question I have is there somebody in your life, not that you're best friend, is there somebody in your life to whom you're their best friend? Is there somebody in your life to whom you're the best example of Christ they have? Is there somebody in your life who, if they don't see your good behavior, they won't see any good behavior? It's an important question in a sinful world. There are so many people who have no good role models. None. We live in a world of partying and debauchery and stealing and lying, and some people that you have contact with on an everyday basis will not see any godly behavior if they don't see it in you. They will not be comforted by any love if they don't get comforted by love from you. They will not know God if they do not know God from you. And the question is, isn't that what love is? The last thing I want to tell you about relationships is relationships in this world can be costly. Jesus had some relationships with his guys, and those relationships cost him everything. And yet, those relationships were priceless. Because of the cost, those relationships have given us everything. The cost was extreme, but the value was priceless. There's a part of our history, American history, of which I'm very ashamed. And I'm not talking about the slavery part. The slavery part I'm ashamed of too. But I'm talking about the part after slavery, 1865 to 1965. Slavery had been declared illegal and unconstitutional. But we exercised a new system of segregation for 100 years in which hatred and animosity and putting down and excluding and hurting and killing was institutionalized, enjoyed, and made profit by. For 100 years. Many of you know who E.V. Hill is. He was a great Baptist preacher. E.V. Hill tells the story, and this is not the story we're talking about today, but E.V. Hill tells the story of going off to Prairie View A&M, the only college that a black guy could go to down in Houston in those days. And he went down to Prairie View A&M. His mother sent him with enough money for a bus ticket and lunch. And when he got there, he was standing in line for enrollment and had no money, and the sign over the enrollment desk said $75 in cash required. And he stood in line not knowing what to do, but he knew that his mother had sent him there to be there, so he was going to be there. And as he's standing in line, a man walked up to him and said, "Are you E.V. Hill?" And he said, "I am." He said, "We have a scholarship with some spending money for you. We want you to be in school here." Well, he tells the next story of his freshman year. As a freshman at Prairie View College, I was actively involved in the Baptist Student Union for blacks held in Nashville, Tennessee. Was the highlight of the year, the convention. Much to my pleasure, I was one of the 2 students elected to go. White students had raised the money, and that was okay with me as I viewed it as an act of pity on their part, or at least a chance to ease their guilty conscience. But then the real trouble began. The trip through the South was by car, 3 whites and 2 blacks traveling together. This is back in the late 50s, early 60s, and it's going from Houston to Tennessee. I had no idea how we'd eat or how we sleep. Everybody knows the problem, right? Blacks couldn't eat at white restaurants. Blacks couldn't stay at white hotels, and whites never ate at black restaurants and never went to black hotels. So great was my anxiety and hatred over how the trip might turn out that I almost backed out entirely. In all my experience, I'd never seen a white man stand up for a black man and felt that I never would. But then Dr. Howard, the director of our trip, and a white man spoke up. He said, "We'll be traveling together. If there isn't a place where all of us can eat, none of us will eat. If there's not a place all of us can sleep, none of us will sleep." That was all he said, but it was enough. For the first time in my life, I met a white man who was Christian enough to take a stand with a Christian black man. And the question is, today, are you ready to take a stand for Christ with someone in your life that needs your love? Oh, we can talk all the day about the romantic love of Valentine's Day. And you know there's one person in this world that you can probably experience that love with. But the offer of God is that you can experience true love with many more than one person. And that love is an eternal love that will last forever. Can we have our musicians back while I read this text in Philippians 2, verse 6? This is a beautiful text. Though he was God, he did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. Instead, he gave up his divine privileges. He took the humble position of a slave and was born as a human being. When he appeared in human form, he humbled himself in obedience to God and died a criminal's death on a cross. Therefore, God elevated him to the place of highest honor and gave him the name above all other names, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow, in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Today, here now, we confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. And we confess that his commandment was that we love one another, not as we would like to be loved, that we love one another as he loved us.